Beyond the basics, building fast and reusable code with Blazor. Have you seen Games Done Quick, GDQ? Do you folks know what that is? Can I see a show of hands? And I'm sorry, I can't see you if you're in the overflow rooms. So there's a few people. This is code done quick. We're literally in 45 minutes going to go from concept to full-featured component with Blazor and show you a bunch of the features of components with Blazor along the way. So there's a lot you're going to see along the way through here. I'll have a link to the demos at the end so you can download the sample code and try it out yourself. But this is all live coding. If you're familiar with me, if you're familiar with some of the things that I do, you know that this is kind of my gimmick. This is my shtick. I do a lot of live coding live on Twitch and YouTube and those types of things. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I will make mistakes. And those of you here in Theater 4, you're more than welcome to raise your hand and say, hey, you forgot, or offer your suggestion as we're pair programming together here, all right? So as we get started, let me introduce myself again. My name is Jeff Fritz. I am a principal program manager at Microsoft. I work in the developer division on all things Visual Studio Code, mostly .NET, and I do a lot of work with the .NET Aspire team. But that's for another session. We'll be talking about .NET Aspire. Today we're going to talk about Blazor, all right? Now, for those of you that don't know, for those of you that haven't worked with Blazor, in 60 seconds, because this is a little bit more of an intermediate topic here, in 60 seconds, Blazor is a next-generation component-based user interface framework built with C# and Razor that runs on an ASP.NET Core server or in the browser using WebAssembly. So this means you can use Razor templates, that's HTML mixed with C#, to compile and deliver content. That's really powerful, right? That's kind of a metaphor that we've been using for years and years to build and develop web content. We're going to take our programming language and we're going to interweave it with HTML, and that's going to render and deliver content. What's interesting about Blazor is we're going to use that to deliver native code, native content directly in the browser using WebAssembly. Or we can have it run on the server and send messages back and forth using things like WebSockets. All right, it actually uses SignalR under the hood if you know your .NET frameworks. Now, of course, you can get started and you can try out Blazor. You install the .NET SDK. It's available on Winget. It's available on all of the Mac and Linux installation systems. It's even packaged and available with Ubuntu. You'll have the .NET SDK available at the command line, and you just run .NET new Blazor, and you'll get a simple Blazor application that you can start with. All right. That's enough of the intro for the folks that haven't seen Blazor. Let's get down to brass tacks and let's actually start building something that we can use here. So I'm going to start with the weather forecast sample. If you're familiar with the Blazor templates at all, this is going to look really familiar to you. The weather forecast sample is a simple grid that has a collection of faux weather forecasts that are generated and painted in an HTML table. Ooh. HTML tables. But this is going to get interesting because we're going to take that table and turn it into a grid component, adding parameters and styles and even a few event handlers along the way. And then as we get to the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you how you can take that grid component and then share it so it can be used with WebAssembly, with Razor server applications, and even how we can share that over to our folks who are building mobile applications. So let me go and start up the default templates here. We're going to do everything from scratch. There's nothing hiding up my sleeves. We're going to write this all live with you here in person at Stir Trek. So let's start off making a brand new folder here. I'm going to call this my Stir Trek component. All right, let's make our I did. So what? That's fine. .NET new, I'm going to create a solution file. So I've got a solution file available. Let's create now my Blazor application. So I can say .NET New Blazor, and I'll let it do the code completion there. I'm going to set this up initially with server interactivity. That is all of my Blazor interactions, all of my user interface interactions that manage the content that appears in the web browser are going to be done on the server. My other options for my interactive selection here, specified by the int flag, are WebAssembly and none. You can do straight server-side rendering with Blazor. No interaction occurs with the client. It's just going to generate HTML and deliver it using the exact same syntax that we have available through all of Blazor. The -O component web, that's the name of the folder I'm going to write that out to. And boom, I have my initial app here. There it is. And I will add to my solution a reference to component web. That's all I need to get started. Let's open Visual Studio Code and start writing some code. Let's start slinging some code here for everybody to work with. That's really going to bug me, isn't it? That's fine. You know what? That's how you know this is live. So here we go. I'm going to drop into my component web, and let's just run .NET Watch. So .NET Watch is a way for us to set up hot reload with our .NET applications so that as code changes, it's automatically going to refresh the browser for me. So I will set up a split screen here so that you can see the browser as I'm writing code over here on the right side. Here's our weather grid. I've shrunk it down just a little bit so that it's easy to see over there. The contents of that grid doesn't really matter, but we're going to make that grid instead of a table like I have over here in weather.razor. Here's the table we're going to replace and turn into a grid component. Every good component library has a grid component because generating tables is something that's easy to do, and if you've been writing HTML since the 90s, it was the only way you did layout in the 90s was tables. But we're going to make this easier so that our component can change and adapt, and we can standardize the way that we're going to build HTML tables throughout the rest of our application. So inside Blazor, components are just Razor files, .razor files that you put out there, and whatever the prefix, whatever the first part of the file name is, that's your component tag that you can use elsewhere in the application. So I'm going to take the contents of these weather forecasts, all of this stuff here, cut that out, jump back over to my Explorer here, and I'm just going to add grid.razor and paste that in there. There we go. Save that. Now, of course, the weather doesn't know what to do here, so I'll tell it, put the grid back in there, but it doesn't know what the forecasts are that it's going to be working with. So I've got a little bit of markup here that works with weather forecasts that it wants to present. So I need to take my first step in building that grid and introduce the data parameters. So let's talk about the data parameters for that. You can add a parameter to your components by using an attribute, right? Inside square brackets, you put the word parameter on a property, a public property, and it doesn't have to be a string or an integer or any other primitive type. You can make it a complex type. In this case, I'm going to pass in an iList, a collection of weather forecasts so that we can start up and have our application present weather forecasts inside my grid. All right. So I'll head back over now to my code, and we'll introduce our parameter. So here, I'll start a code block, and we'll define a parameter, easy for me to spell. Is that font size big enough out there on the top row? Is it good enough? Thank you. All right. So we will set a public iList of type weather forecast. And we'll call this forecasts, right? And this is a get set, but I've got a red underline on weather forecast. Here's the deal. in the default template, weather forecast is actually a private class inside the weather page. So we need to move this thing so it's somewhere that the rest of our application can reference it. Let me do that quickly. I'm just going to go over here, I don't know, somewhere down here, and I'm just going to create a class file. I don't know what the name of it is. I don't care. Paste that back in. Let's make this public, and let's set this with the file scope namespace for component web. There we go. All right. So weather forecast is now a thing. I don't want it to be called class. I want to make sure that my teammates can find this thing. So rename that file, good to go. I don't need to worry about that. App settings, who cares? This is okay now. That should be able to discover it. I'll go down here. Yes, you can restart my application. So that will restart, and there we go. I still don't have, restart the application. I still don't have content appearing because I'm not passing the forecasts into my weather. So we define that as a parameter. Parameters inside of my components appear as tag attributes on my markup. So here in weather, where I'm referencing my grid, I can say forecasts, and I'll just pass in the collection of forecasts that we've put together on the page, and immediately you see hot reload refreshed, and my grid works again. Here we go. Next step. So we've done the basics, right? We've got a grid out here that shows forecasts, but that's great for my weather folks. But what happens when I want to use this for other things? We need to start evolving our grid a little bit more. So we're going to start talking about component contents. So we have a grid that knows how to take forecasts and present them. We're going to now give you a way to specify some of the content inside the grid from outside the grid. All right? And we do this with with an object called a render fragment. Now, a render fragment is just a block of HTML and Razor markup. So that can be HTML mixed with C#. It can be references to other Blazor components. It's easy to just mix that all together, and that collection of markup will be passed along. There is a default capability that you can use called a child content property that by convention, a property named child content, capital C, of type render fragment is the contents inside that component. So we have grid end begin tag, and then between end begin tag and beginning of the end tag, whatever is inside of there is the child content, and we can access through this property. Okay, so I can also specify a type parameter on that so that we can create a little bit of templated content. And we can pass that content, that specific type, into our template and let it do stuff with it. So in our case, where we're dealing with weather forecasts, I can pass a forecast into a template that is managed in the weather forecast page. That the weather forecast page will dictate the grid how to format. Let's take a look at that and walk through this and break things along the way, because that's what I do. All right, so I have a grid here, and it's a grid of type weather forecast. Let's get rid of weather forecast and specify a type parameter for this grid. And we do that with a directive here up at the top called type param. And I'm going to make it T-item. For those of you that are C# developers, this is a generic type of feature. It's going to render and appear as a generic constraint on all the references I have to my grid. So I can now come down here and I can reference this as not a collection of weather forecasts, but as a collection of T-items, which means I don't want to call this forecast. I probably want to call this items. Similarly, up here, I don't want to say var forecast in items. I probably want to say var item in items. Okay, So I've got a little bit of a start here, and I'd like to specify and pass in this template of this row content from outside, that template type of capability. So let's define an item template. Well, that's going to be another parameter, and I'll call this a render fragment, right? A render fragment of a specific type, and I'll call this item template. I'd also like to point out I've turned off Copilot for this session. Yeah, thank you. Because back in my day, we didn't have any AI helping us code. I will tell you that when I was practicing this last night at 2 in the morning using Copilot, I finished delivering the session in 10 minutes flat. So that's what Copilot gives you once you know how to do this, okay? But if you're like me and you're an old guy and you like to type it by hand, we're going to go through and talk and explain it along the way instead of having the AI kind of steal my thunder, all right? Cool. Thank you. I appreciate the reaction from the group. All right, so let me take this content and I'm going to say item template, and I can pass in the item that I want that template to format, right? So that, in this case, weather forecast. Back over in the weather, I don't have an item template here yet. It doesn't know what to do with that. So let's give it an item template, and I'll paste in those table cells. Nope. Turn off numlock. There we go. I like to format things so they're neat and tidy. Now, this item template that I'm passing in, it doesn't know what item is, but it does know what context is. Context. So I can take that. Now, Copilot likes to rewrite this entire section of the talk for me. I'm doing it by hand. There we go. And this is going to come back, and let's make sure I got this right. Did I get it right? We need to restart. Yeah, I know. Waiting for a file to change. I broke something. Item template must contain a non-null value, considering the required, blah, blah, blah. Let's go back over here. I defined item template. It's a parameter. I have... in the other file? Yes. Thank you. There we go. I renamed the parameter and I didn't rename the attribute there. There we go. Well done. Thank you. Folks here in Theater 4 say, those of you that are watching in the other theaters, you're missing where all the cool code suggestions are happening. That's right. This is my Copilot right here. So, just like a Twitch stream, and nobody exclamation point hat. Okay, you folks didn't get that joke. So I am a 10x developer, that's right. So here's the deal. The grid looks exactly the same. I have an item template that I'm passing in, and that's nice, but I'm specifying TDs over here, right? I'm kind of giving away the ghost here that I'm creating an HTML table. In the future, or when my designer friends take a look at this, they're going to say, what are you doing, Fritz, with these TRs and TDs? We do divs and spans now. And they're going to want to change the markup, and that's okay. But everywhere that I'm using my grid here, I'm referencing TDs. I probably want to specify something like a column or an item, right, or a field for my grid instead of TDs here and actually referencing the HTML type directly. So let's talk about our next feature that we're going to discuss, cascading parameters. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up some sort of a column component type that we're going to use to be able to define what the items are, how each one of the items is formatted. And in order for that column to know how to work with the grid, we're going to pass a reference to the grid into the columns. This is going to bake your noodle because we're going to kind of work backwards. We saw how to pass parameters into a component, well, we're going to go from the component and pass itself into other components. Stay with me here, all right? So we have a cascading parameter. It's a way for us to have a parameter that's made available to all the components inside the cascading value tags, okay? And we can also cascade a parameter type. So in the case of our grid, where we have a type of object that's in the grid, we also want to pass that parameter type, in our case weather forecast, into our column objects so that the columns know that they're working with weather forecasts. Make sense? Did I lose anybody? Fantastic. So let's do this. Oh, and one more thing we need to do along the way. We're going to work with the component lifecycle. In Blazor, we've simplified the lifecycle of our components down to 3 events: on initialized, on parameter set, and on after render. And you see the text that I wrote there about what each of those is, okay? Pretty easy to understand. We're gonna go through and we're gonna wire these up and start building columns that are a little bit more abstract, defining how our grid works. So let's start off defining a column component over here. So I will create column.Reusable, and we're going to have a type parameter on this. It is type T_item. I have to have the same type parameter constraint name as I do up inside my grid if I'm going to pass along that type parameter cascaded into the child components. So let's put an attribute here. No, not attribute, blank. Too smart for us here. And we're going to say this is a cascading type parameter, and it is T_item. All right. So that knows how to have a type parameter here. I'm going to specify some code inside of our column. Thank you so much. So the first thing that we want is that render fragment that is the template of here's what's inside this column. So let's set up another public render fragment of type T_item, and we'll call that child content. There we go. We also need a reference to the grid, and I'm going to receive that as a cascading parameter. So this is a public grid of type T_item. See how the grid has become a generic type. And I'll call this parent grid. Fantastic. So now, over on the grid, I want to be able to collect a collection of columns. So if I'm going to have a collection of columns that appear inside of an element, right? So let's move this over. If I want this instead of item template to be columns, like this, and I want each of these to be a column, right? So let's just copy paste, because this is the desired way that I'd like my code to look. Now, yeah, see, it doesn't, it's kind of back over here. I don't know what these things are. That's right, you don't. So I have item template. I need to collect columns and do something with it. So that is a parameter. Turn off caps lock. Public render fragment. All right. Columns. Now, columns is just a collection of these things here. Hey, I forgot to, that's not a matching. Thank you. It's just a collection of these. How do I pass the grid into each of those columns? I'm so glad you asked. Let's go down here, and I'm going to put an area at the bottom here, cascading value, and the value is this, the grid that I'm going to pass through, and I'm just going to write out the collection of columns. Each column doesn't have any markup that it's rendering. It's going to pass information into the parent grid to tell it what to do. So let's set that up. I'm going to override, come on, tell me this works. Nope, not going to work. for some reason, the overrides here for the Blazor events aren't rendering for me quite properly in Visual Studio Code. So when my column is initialized, when it renders it, I want to notify the parent grid, hey, I exist, so that it can figure out what to do with it. So I'm going to say parent grid, let's figure out a method here called add column, and add this. So I'm going to go into my grid. There's caffeine in the hall if you're all right. So let me add a collection here. I'll create a private list of type column, of type T-item, and I'll call this columns. And we'll just initialize it right there. And let's add a method that allows us to add to that, not public, but an internal method. Add column, there we go. And we're going to pass in a column of type T-item, right? So now, not columns, and I will say columns, add our new column. So now I've got a grid that's going to pass that column information back, and when this renders, it's going to know I have a collection of columns, but uh-oh. All right, we got more work to do here. So item template isn't a thing here. Instead, we're going to want to do a for each across our collection of columns. So for each, let's just call it call. I think that works. In the columns collection, we're going to output a TD, and let's just say call child content for the item. Save that, and we have our grid loaded again. Now, what have I done? I've completely abstracted away from the weather any sense of what the HTML markup is for the grid. So when your designer friend comes along and says, hey, we want divs and spans in here. Hey, we want to use some other markup. Hey, we'd like to use JavaScript framework XYZ. You can adapt because you've abstracted away those features inside of your components. Make sense? So we are cruising along here. I've got plenty of time left on this. So that's nice. That's your garden variety bootstrap table. But I want more. My designer friends like to be able to style these things, right? They want to be able to put some capabilities with CSS styles to them. And we can do that in Blazor using a feature called attribute splatting. Here's the thing, friends. If we let marketing name features, they come up with a name like C# attributes for Blazor components. Now, too many words, too complex. Attribute splatting, right? I think I'm all right. There we go. I was going to say I've got some stubble, but wow, that's interesting. All right. So where was it? Attribute splatting. So just like if a fly lands on your code and you smack it and it splats fly guts all over your code, that's what we're going to do with any extra attributes that we don't know. So what this does is we can specify a dictionary, a collection of attributes that haven't been recognized by our component, collect those, and give us some way to place them inside of our component. And you can splat, you can kind of smear them out into another component by using the @attributes attribute. That's weird to say. Doesn't matter the name of that dictionary, the parameter with that capture unmatched values up at the top, that's the important part. And the @attributes allows you to take anything extra and kind of push those attributes onto whatever that tag is. Let's take a look at how we can do this and add CSS styles into our component. Are we good on sound? Did I mess anything up here with the headset? We're good? Cool. All right. So let's do this. I'm going to show over here, and let's shrink you back down a little bit. There we go. So I'd like to be able to put on my columns here, right? Where I have the date, I'd like to be able to put style equals, let's say, my fingers aren't used to this keyboard. Here we go. For the date, let's make that font weight bold. Let's make the color white. And let's make the background color navy. And you see here, I'm already getting, whoa, I don't know what this is. I'm missing a end tag here. Yeah, thanks VS Code. There we go. And I don't have a property matching the name style. So this is where we're going to capture those extra properties and start working with them. So I will create a parameter here, and I will say, see it? I'm already prompted for it right here. Capture unmatched values. Capture unmatched values, true. And the type that we have to make this is a dictionary of type string, object, and I'll just call this other values. All right, and just to make sure we always have one, I'm going to default that to new. So I've always got a dictionary there. All right, I'll go back over to my grid, and where I'm outputting the TD here, let's add a little bit of style to that. So I'll just say style equals, and we'll say call dot other values contains key, right? Contains key, thank you. If it contains the key style, then we're going to output call other values style. Otherwise, no. And okay. Refresh, and it's still not liking me. What's going on? Let's take a quick look. I need, come on, show me some errors here. It's wonderful. Hot reload. Force the reload. Show me what you got. There it is. Close that, refresh, and I have my styles applied. Okay, so we did a little bit of attribute splatting there. That means that inside here, I can add a style to any of these, and it'll format and output that information. I'm still kind of constrained to this idea of this being a weather grid because I have these elements up here that have the header text. So let's also add a property here for the header text to make that easier to define on my column objects. So I'll create one more parameter, and this is a simple string called header text. Get set that, and we'll default this to string empty. So in my grid, I'll get rid of these, and we'll just do a for each across those columns. For each var call in columns, and we'll say th at call header text. And, oh yeah, I have to put the header text on the weather page. Man, I'm doing a number here with this microphone. Header text equals, the first is the date. Next is the temperature in Celsius. Temperature in freedom units. And summary. Save that, and where'd it go? Why didn't? That's not going to be the one that's causing the issue here. I put that in there. I think I know what this is. Let me put one more bit right there. Nope, still didn't get it. Force the reload. because that's the way it's supposed to work. And there we go. All right. So I've got headers. I've got my grid laid out the way I want it to. Let's hammer through the last of this, because there's just one or two more features that I want to make sure that you see as we come into the end here. The next bit is CSS isolation. You might have some standard CSS that you want to apply to your component so that everybody always gets the same look and feel. You can do that by creating .razor.css files that sit with the same name as your component, and it will always apply that CSS to your component. So let's add that now for our grid. So I'll jump back in here, and I will add a new file here. Where is it? New file. Why don't I see it? Grid, Razor, CSS, and let's force the TH, the header, to have a certain look and feel. I want that to be bold. I'd like the background color to be gray. Thank you. And the foreground color, let's make that white. All right. And it didn't apply it. Here's the thing. When you add a new CSS file like this, you need to force it to restart. Hot reload won't pick up those CSS changes. So you actually need to force it to restart, and it carries it through. That's great. I have my component now with some isolated CSS that works everywhere. Let's take our next step and share that so the rest of my colleagues can use this. So sharing components is real easy to do because we can create what are called Razor class libraries. You can take your CSS, you can take any JavaScript that goes with this, and along with all your Razor files, put it in that library, and you can reference and use that anywhere you'd like across the application or other applications. So let's add that capability here. I'm going to cancel out of my console down here at the bottom, jump up one, and I'm going to create a new Razor class lib. Oh, there it is, called My Components. It'll create that from a template real quick here for us. Yes, thank you. And I will jump back into, what did I call? Yeah, component web, there it goes. Let's add a reference to that Razor class library. So .NET add reference my components. So now I have a reference from my project to the component library. Good. And I will add an imports using statement right here. My components. Fantastic. Finally, let's take those components, my column, my grid razor. I'm going to cut that all out of there, drop down to my other project, paste those in, and let's .NET watch one more time. And if I go back over to the weather, there it is. But is it really there, Fritz? Are you just gimmicking around here? I mean, come on. You're pulling the wool over my head here. This is a real component. Wow. Wow. No, that's Copilot. Really? Real component. Save that. It's going to update. This is a real component you see on the left. Okay, we've gone through a lot. This Razor class library can now be used inside of other projects. It's easy to pick up and reference it in Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor Hybrid applications. I don't have enough time to show a Blazor Hybrid application running this, and quite frankly, I've had a little bit of a challenge with .NET MAUI on this machine this morning. But because you have it packaged inside of a library, you can package that library as a NuGet package, deploy it wherever you'd like. It's real easy to do at that point using the same techniques that you have for other class libraries in .NET. we are just about at time, right? We're just about at time? Yeah, all right. I hit the post. Look at that. So, a couple resources for you. You can learn all about Blazor at learn.microsoft.com. You might recognize a guy in a sequin jacket teaching all about Blazor there. I don't know who he could be. There's also everything you need to know to get started with Blazor at blazor.net. But importantly, this demo you just saw, there's another version of it that I wrote that also includes a little bit of JavaScript isolation that you can check out and how you can wire up JavaScript inside your components. Check it out on GitHub. It's at github.com/C#Fritz. That's my screen name. /Fritz.componentsdemo. I really should fix that text so it doesn't wrap. You can find me in all the places online. You can find me on YouTube, on Twitch, on GitHub, on Twitter, on Blue Sky. I am C#Fritz in all the places. You can also find me on C#Fritz.com. All right? If you have any questions, I'll be sticking around here for a bit, and I'll be giving the next session in these rooms talking about .NET Aspire. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you in a little bit. All right, you must have some questions. I didn't just rumble through that for nothing. No? It was that good that you don't have any questions? It's all perfectly clear.
That actually was great.
Oh.
Hey, Fritz.
Yes.
I thought you were going to show off unit testing your components.
Didn't quite get there. The question was, can you show unit testing the components? Oh, look, hit the timer. I didn't quite get there. And quite frankly, it's real easy now to actually let Copilot generate the unit tests. So what I like to do is I'll set up an integration testing web project that references each component one on a page so I can browse and actually watch it and do that type of side-by-side hot reload development as I'm growing a component. And as I'm growing it, let Copilot generate unit tests using bunit on the side. So it's a good question. It's something I do need to add into the presentation. Let me see what I can do over the next week or so. I am actually building a couple of other components to share on my GitHub. I always have this need for an environment flag, right? Like, you know how many of us, we have not just our development area, we have our production, and then there's some test or stage or training area that's in between. So I have an environment flag that you can add as a component into your main layout, and it will always stay parked on top in the browser with development or production or whatever the environment name is. You can place it on each of the four corners of the browser or horizontally across the bottom, and I've been evolving that because I always run into this issue of, am I looking at my production space, am I looking at my development space, and I can't tell without reading the address bar which one it is, and to have a big red light in front of me that says production, like that'll get me to stop. So. But you're right, I need to add testing to this. Let me work on that and I will get back to you. Any other questions? All right.